Hello and welcome to another episode of I Survive Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host Scott and this is my co-host Caleb.
Hello there.
We're back again to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. So Caleb, tell us, who's our guest today?
Yeah, it was our old friend Bill, who he came into our youth group during his, he moved to Minnesota and started joining our youth group about his junior year of high school, which was also my junior year and I believe your sophomore year. So
Correct.
I kind of joined a little later in high school, but he moved to Minnesota and connected with us. And he talks about that throughout the episode too. So Bill.
It was great to talk with Bill. I hadn't talked with him in a long time, about 15 years, and maybe here or there, but not that long of a conversation in a really long time. And the fact of the matter is that the three of us were really close. We did a lot of things together in high school and in youth group together. And while we may be at different spots, there's clearly a lot of connection that we still have.
Yeah, and even after youth group, right? I mean, we were both in his wedding, right?
Correct.
Up in Ishpeming.
Shout out Ishpeming.
Oh, we could do a whole episode on his wedding. Probably.
That's true. We probably could.
Me and Bill actually our families went to the same church for a while too. Post-college, post-youth group, kind of in our 30s. We were at the same church for a while, in the same small group even for a while. And even he was on my slow pitch softball team for a while. So I saw Bill through my 30s pretty regularly. Then they moved churches and we hadn't seen them as much after that.
This is a real offshoot, but didn't he get hit in the face with a bat?
Yes, he did.
Poor Bill.
That was the worst night of softball I've ever had. Somebody threw a bat. It hit him in the face. He left on a stretcher. And I had to drive to his house so that his wife, I think he said his wife's name. We're trying to be careful about names and just throwing out names. But so I had to drive to his house to watch his kids in my gross softball stuff while his wife went to the hospital so she could drive him home. Absolutely horrifying.
Well, first of all, thanks, Bill, for your sacrifice. And also, let's add church softball to the list of things we want to talk about in the future. But it was a great conversation with him. And, Bill's experience is a little bit different than maybe some. You said he arrived junior year. So, 2 years, that's a long 2 years we had with him. And then after 2 years of high school, he was volunteering at that church for, another 10 years. So, looking back on our conversation, it's interesting to think what part of what he's remembering is from, that time as a youth, but also time as a volunteer.
Yeah, I think it's another great thing about this show is it does highlight those different experiences because my experience was very different than Bill's. I was, 7th, 8th, 9th, kind of 7th grade on, and then once I went off to college, I was not really involved in anything youth group post high school. It just never really happened for a variety of reasons, but where, Bill was kind of joined late and then was there for a long time. So yeah, just a very, unique and different experience that kind of, gives him a different insight and a different perspective on that youth group experience.
And this is a good chance for us to say, for a lot of these conversations, the perspective of who we're talking to is not the perspective that we share. Caleb and I share different perspectives, that sort of thing. So we're not necessarily to endorse or contradict what people are saying. In fact, we want to give a good, safe space to have these conversations. So there's no antagonism towards each other. But, there are some things that he brought up that, looking back on, we're like, I don't really think so. And that's okay.
Yeah. Me and him were texting afterwards and I kind of said that, that there's some things that he just looks back on more fondly. And it's not that I look at them as I'm antagonistic or, upset about them. I just don't see them maybe in the same light that he does. And again, I think some of that perspective is part of it, and there's just a variety of reasons why that could be. But again, that was why it was kind of interesting to hear from him. And as he was saying things, it was like, oh yeah, did I think about that the same way, or did I remember that the same way? And it was even just challenging to me to kind of think through, some of the things that he was talking about. So yeah.
Well, we hope you all enjoy this episode. Bill, thank you very much for coming on. Bill is actually our first guest, so it's a little raw. Who knows if it'll get better from here? It probably won't. Quality will probably stay the same.
There's no chance it will get better.
That's right.
And he was absolutely our audio guinea pig.
Yes.
Try this now. Yeah. I don't know. Restart. Have you restarted your machine? I don't know what to do.
Yeah. He was great. Bill, thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hi, this is Caleb, the producer of the show, just breaking in like I do every episode to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this show may not actually be held or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead let people share how they feel. We also know that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remembered the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We have the pleasure of speaking today with our very old friend, Bill. Bill, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
So I have to say that Bill and Caleb and I have been friends for a very long time, and while we may not have spoken very frequently in the last few years, there's a lot of memories here. So if we go down memory lane a little hard, we apologize. But
yeah, I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener.
I don't know if we have many listeners at all, so that's amazing. So yeah, Bill, we wanted to bring you on and just talk about, what you remember from our youth group at Five Oaks, how that's impacted your life now, how that's affected you and your family's life, so on and so forth. So we appreciate you taking some time today to speak with us. First and foremost, tell the audience, how did you come to join Five Oaks? How did you get to know us? What was that like for you at the beginning stages?
Well, yeah, I was looking back. I think it was like 95, probably. My family up and moved from Illinois to Minnesota. And that fateful day, I think maybe Dave was assigned as like the new student escort for me. So it took me around to my classes because we had a few common classes, but we had different math. And you have this crazy thing that I didn't know about in Minnesota where you had A, B, and C classes over lunch.
Right.
So someone had the bright idea of taking a math class and slapping lunch right in the middle of it, halfway through, and then finishing math after lunch. I didn't know that was a thing. So I went to the wrong lunch the first day of school, and Dave invited me to sit down with you guys, and they were super friendly. And then I got to class, and I missed half of my class. And then I realized that was stupid for a new student to miss first year math class. And then I didn't see you guys for like the rest of the semester. But Caleb tried out for a drama, if you recall, way back. We both got spots in Midsummer Night's Dream, and he got Puck, which is normally cast as a woman, but he did a fantastic job, so they gave it to him. And that's, story went on from there. You guys pulled me into the youth group and made me feel like I was part of the life. Fast friends, starting from that all-nighter where you told me about the amazing peanut butter banana smush battles and all these things.
Oh, man.
Excellent. I don't even remember those.
Just so we're clear, my kids love the story about me making the one-act play and how it upset everyone. That's one of their favorite dad from high school stories. Is remember when everybody was mad at you for getting that part in the play? Yes, kids, I remember.
And there was no reason. I mean, I wasn't anybody. Nobody knew me. First, I think that the director replaced the normal director that year, so they didn't know who the favorites were. And I did this stupid thing. I was supposed to be the moon, like as my secondary character, because the play is about people putting on a play, right? So like I did this thing where I kind of arced across the screen and put my hands higher, and then like the moon rose and set over the course of the scene. The director's like, that kid's crazy. I want him.
It's got potential. It's also why we invited your youth group, Potential. No, we did have that experience of meeting you early on and then not seeing you for a while, and it was whether happenstance or by God's grace or whatever we call it, all of a sudden, boom, here we are in the same play, and you fit right in right away. With your upbringing, was that were you in a Christian home upbringing, or was this a little bit of a departure for you?
I think when I was really young, my parents divorced. And then so my mom moved back in with my grandparents. They were part of kind of a more traditional church with like, the incense and the golden cross in the middle of the aisle and you got to take a knee and all that stuff. But then when my mom remarried, we didn't really participate in much of a church.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a friend of mine in middle school that got saved in Illinois. His life totally changed. He invited me in, and then really I was part of that youth group. Didn't even go to their church once, just the youth group. And then at Five Oaks, I got part of that youth group, and that was a kind of a cool thing I think about our youth group is seemed like about half the kids didn't have any connection to the church. It was just other kids that wanted to make them feel like they had a home. So that was me, just the homeless new kid that was kind of folded in.
And what do you think it was about the way youth group was done at Five Oaks that drew you in and kind of kept you there?
Well, I mean, the ridiculous games was a nice element. But really, no, I think I have to give some props to John here for really trying to push, and I didn't know this until I started to become a leader in the youth group, but trying to push the kids to actually get outside of their clique and their self, even though you can't, but to push them to actually care about those new people and make them feel like they fit. And there was a bunch of people that I think that kind of lit a fire for them. And at least for a while, they were doing that. And they just welcomed me. Number one. Number two, the leaders. We had so many leaders that just gave up so much of their time. Right. And that was a huge thing for me. Like I think about, oh gosh, like Johnny Rock and Mark and Thad and Tom and Tim and Jeff. I can't even think of all the names, right? All these people that just poured out their hearts for us. And some of those people like gave so much of their life that it's just like, okay, now it's like John and Julie. It's like, Tom and Jody. And it's like that whole family just became part of that youth group thing for me.
Mm-hmm. And you're still really connected with that family. Like that's a relationship that's lasted decades.
Oh yeah.
Because of their involvement with you as a kid.
Right. And, it started with, even though Tom did not like those music festivals, he came. That was the famous Dorito tan sunburn moment, right? There's great elements there. But we had people that gave us their time, and like Tom was like a mentor for us in youth group, and then I was helping out in the youth group, and his kids were coming through, and then his kids were watching our kids when they were first born, and now we have a chance to like interact with them now that his kids have kids, and they did. Tom and Jody did our premarital counseling, initially. So it was, but that like birthed out of this idea that we fold people in to relationships, and we don't just stay, exactly where we're comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Those memories are created with adults helping us out, along the way and kind of giving us a framework to experience a lot of things because we're going through a lot as high schoolers. What are some of your most like vivid memories of youth group? Like anything that stands out as something that is still with you, still kind of influences you?
Well, this is ridiculous, but I do remember one of the youth. So we had these two major getaways, the motel getaway and the camp getaway, which, you'd never do this today, but back in the day, we would rent a bunch of rooms at a hotel, or it really wasn't that classy. It was a motel. Yeah. And then we would probably use the pool room, I think, for like our worship sessions. I remember one of those sessions, maybe Mike was involved. Somebody got a hold of somebody and dumped them into the pool in the middle of the worship phase. So that was kind of memorable. Remember running around with our toy guns, pretending to shoot each other throughout the hotel and various other elements. Again, a little bit different time than we have today. So those are kind of some foolish things, but the concert festivals, like those were huge, right? That was a big part of me. I didn't like the sound of my life before then was a lot of like kind of sadness, I think, and feeling like I wasn't grounded, like Chili Peppers stuff, which I still love the music, but like my soul was like grieving in the music all the time. But getting involved in this group, I found a different rejoicing sound, if that makes sense. Like I feel like it kind of echoes back through how I experience it. Of course, the youth groups, like the big events that we had and the conferences and, going to Colorado or those are some really cool multi-day events.
For youth conferences, yeah.
Right. Oh, and we would never stay in like the most comfortable situations. Like again, John intentionally would keep us up late, get us up early, sleeping on the floor because he could break down the like self-absorbed foolishness that we have for a few brief moments, for a moment of clarity to like encounter the gospel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, those are, I mean, as we continue to talk about these things, everybody's going to bring up something that I have forgotten about, and like those getaways were a big deal. I definitely remember falling into the pool because we were doing some sort of like worship confession time. I
Yes,
don't
it
think
was like a deep, serious
it was, I
moment.
don't think it was a push though. I think like someone was going up to hug Mike or something, and it was just like, well, here we go, splash into the pool during this deeply intense
I remember
time.
who it was. I don't know if I should say
You don't
it.
want to out him in loud.
No, I don't know. I do remember who it was, and I do remember it was during some sort of like we were doing. This is gonna be weird. We were doing like confession with
Yeah,
like
yeah,
45 people,
yeah.
which may not be the way to do confession looking back on it, but I do remember it was somebody going up to like hug somebody, and they were trying to go around the
Yes,
pile of chairs we had,
yes.
and they went
Right
into
next
the
to the
pool.
pool.
Yep,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
remember that.
So this is that early era too. I don't know if you remember this, but one really impactful thing to me was we had a motel getaway, I think. There was or maybe it was just the student leaders like that John had at that time where there's some extra discipling we were getting. But there's an event where we were in the motel, we were praying. We decided to just pray and do popcorn prayer, which I'd never heard of. This like revolutionary thing, right? And like, I don't know, like Bonnie was there and like all these people, like all this boys and girls were there for this prayer time. But for me, it was like so impactful, like hearing my other peers and friends just crying out to God and like reaching up with the things that were heavy on their heart. It was like um, I didn't see that happening. I didn't understand that could happen. That like we had access to God in that desperate sense. So for me, that was one really big thing that stuck with me for a long time since then.
Yeah, that's great. This is what we are curious to reminisce about is like what is still with us. So, I mean, in that sense, like, how would you describe your faith in the '90s compared to what it's like today?
Sorry, I got to go back on one more. When you say the stuff that stuck with us, the immediate thing I pictured was two more moments where Scott jumped on the hood and broke John's windshield by hitting it too hard.
I was very excitable.
Little Scott destroyed the windshield. And
Yeah.
who was it? Ryan's foot that got run over?
Yeah, Ryan's
by
foot. Yeah, he ran over Ryan's foot, and then we went to Mexico still with Ryan's foot all broken.
A few of those moments too. So, okay, sorry. Could you ask your question?
That's fine. That's fine. No more reminiscing though. Now it's serious. So you kind
Serious
of
hat on.
gave an outline of what's your faith? How would you describe it now? Like looking back, 25 years, how would you describe your faith as an adult?
For me, I think it's kind of richer and more mature than it was back then. We have like, I was a new Christian, right? So I was kind of passionate, but I didn't have a lot of grounding or kind of durability. Like I think about that parable of the seed that was put in the ground and it sprung up at first and it had all this excitement, but then like there's no roots, so when the heat came, it died. And I think there was a chance for that to be me, right? Early on, but the roots came and I had people that discipled me and so many guys that poured into me. So I think those are there a little bit more now. Like we have, my wife and I have had the chance to start like multiple small groups since then. And, that's been a big thing. Like that's one thing. I don't know how to be a Lone Ranger Christian. Like I grew up into faith in community. So I just can't do it. I don't know how, at least. I guess if I'm some prison somewhere, I might figure it out, but I don't know how to be a Christian by myself. So, for me, I think that connectedness is a big thing. I'm actually, I recently became an elder at my church now. So that's kind of weird because I don't think of myself as that old or mature to do that. But, I guess when somebody's got to do it, somebody's got to do it, right?
No, I joke.
You're definitely old enough. I want to be real clear. We've all pushed into that area.
We're definitely in elder territory.
I did have to scratch off in your question, Scott, because it said, "What would your 18-year-old self say to your 43-year-old self?" I was like,
Oh, sorry.
45-year-old self.
Mid 40s. I'll change that
Yeah.
on the list to mid 40s self. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, but I joke about that. But I actually I remember specifically
like a decade or something ago and saying, gosh, like I really want to grow up more in my faith because I want to be able to help and serve alongside some of these people, these different guys that I knew that I felt were more mature in their faith. And I was like, I want to be able to do that sometime to serve in that way. And like God's been gracious to me to try to do that. Obviously, I still got a lot of problems, but there's been layers of growth on top of that. Like you think about a tree and like the bark grows on each layer out there, and it's not like a one season thing, right? So it's like a little more seasoned now, I think.
Well, what would you say? What would you say is different than where you were at that back then?
I was actually thinking about that. There wasn't a lot of specific things that I felt like I moved away from or outgrew. It's more kind of like a growing from, like growing up in, I guess, from the way they think about it. Like we had so much opportunity to be in like marriage groups. Like even Ryan's dad put like an early marriage group in for us that we were part of, and there's a lot of building there. I have it's kind of funny. I didn't have a church background, and I started being in the youth group, and then I just kept serving in the youth group. Like at Five Oaks, I think I stayed there for about 12 years, which
may not seem like much
necessarily, but think about this, that I did not live in a house for more than 5 years until after I married my wife, from the time I was born, I don't think. Maybe I'm off by like 9 months or something like that.
You moved a lot around.
Yeah, so I never had a place that I was at for 5 years, but I was at that church for 12 years. So to me, that was like a big thing. And then the other thing I was thinking is I actually have, since I became a Christian, of all of the years, I think there's only been like 4 years that I haven't been involved in student ministry. So I'm with a couple of guys now. I was with, my church does a cool thing where you kind of stay with them if possible from 6th grade all the way through high school when they graduate. So I've got some new 6th graders after taking a year off in between there. But like, I look at how many people invested in me, and I don't think I'd be stable if it wasn't some of the people that invested in me. It's like, that's where my heart's at,
That's great. That's great. I mean, looking back on what we had together when we were teenagers in high school, like it seems to me like there were some very solid experiences that just very foundational, just kind of buoyed you and continued on throughout, your adult life, which is great. I mean, that's why I think that's why a lot of us stayed in youth group for so long, because, you don't have to go. You can come and go as you please. And all of us at one point were on a leadership team. All of us at one point were leading junior high kids or whatever. And all of us at some point have volunteered post graduation.
It can be tricky being a leader, though. Do you remember one of these that jumped out at me was the bonfire at the old property? The church had the 2 buildings, or the 3 buildings. There was 2 barns and then the one house.
Barns. Right.
And one of the barns got tore down, and the instruction was slowly burn this pile of wood until it burns down. And I think John had to be gone that time. And one female leader agreed to be the supervisor for this event. And the kids decided, instead of to make a small 3x3 bonfire, which was licensed from the fire department, to burn the entire barn in one shot.
Not standing.
Not standing.
Not the wood from the barn.
But it was like a 30-foot tall pile of wood.
Yeah, it was huge.
Give or take. So, yeah.
I remember you could see it from like Bailey Road. I remember driving, like when people were driving up there, like, oh yeah, we thought the whole house had just caught on fire. Yeah, you could see it. You could see it from Bailey.
Well, notable, I believe that there wasn't water out that far, like strong water.
Not
so
yet.
They filled up the water truck and they put it out. They had to refill the water truck to finish putting it out.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, nostalgia. Can't handle it.
Again, one more time, Bill, and you're kicked out. No, I think, Caleb, you had you made the mention that it was Tim Keller who talks about, as you grow up through marriage, you realize you're married to 5 or 6 different
Mm-hmm.
people, because people, obviously change and that kind of stuff. Bill, how many, like, your faith wise, like, how many different phases do you think you've been through here the last couple of decades? Obviously, I mean, family changes
Right. Yeah,
notwithstanding.
I was trying to think about that, like what are the big events? I don't think about these as faith phases, but like just in terms of what are some big things in my like adult life that have impacted my faith. I think number one was meeting my wife. Like I met her just as I was finishing college, and that was an amazing find. She's this godly woman. I was like totally smitten with her. I tried to marry her without dating her, but Mike pulled me back. He's like, dude, you should date her first. So there's a whole thing there. You could probably thank Mike for that. Um, but I mean, that was big. I think when my kids were becoming teens, entering that was a big thing. Like I had a lot of anxiety about um, not knowing if I knew how to really care for them or raise them. And everybody's like, "Oh, teenagers are nightmares and all this stuff," right? You hear,
Right.
and I kind of struggled with that until a point that I felt like God really met me and to say, like, look, um, it's not like number one, it's not going to help if you're just like hesitant and anxious and you pour that into this poor kid being a teenager. Like, how about a little optimism and you being a positive force in their life as one kind of like soft rebuke? But I think the other thing is just realizing that my kids were like fantastic toddlers, right? They're great babies. They're awesome adolescents. Like, they're probably going to be some of the best teenagers I get to be around. So, like, just enjoy it. But that was like a big struggle for me. I think more recently, losing Kara's mom was really tough. She was someone that was around for like all these birthdays and Christmas and big events and really obviously it impacted Kara the most, but it's something that really impacted us. Coincided with one of the kids deciding that they wanted to get baptized like soon after that. They're like really were thinking about it. And um, then also we talked about Tom's funeral, right? You mentioned it. My friend Tom and another friend of mine, Tim, both died within like about a year. Uh, and Tim was like my age basically. So that was really tough. I actually had to go, uh, chose to go back and get some additional counseling from a biblical counselor because I was just really wrestling with that and had like a really rough job changeover around the same time. And so for me, there was like wrestling with this sense of loss and like God's goodness in that. And I know he's good, but at the same time, it was just really something I needed to work through. And like, what does grieving look like? What does like what does going past it look like? What does being in it look like? And does it have to be all at once? I don't know. I didn't figure it all out, but it was a good thing for me. That makes sense. And then, in between that, and maybe this was important, but Kara and I had a chance to go to some counseling training. There's this biblical counseling thing about taking the Bible and actually applying it like actively to your life, like thinking about, I have this pattern of thinking and there's a desire behind it. And is it effective? Is it helping me right now? Is it actually lining up with what it says? And if not, can you identify what's like the deceit or not helpful and take some truth from the Bible and actually plant a good seed, like weed up the bag of seed, plant in the good seed, right? So we got to go through that, and that tooling I think has been helpful, and it came back around when these losses happened too, to think through like what's like, is there anything that these actually make a difference, you know? So for me, there was.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know a lot of people who just can't have a very difficult time moving past those tragedies, and they fall back on, even if it's a faith that they may have lost, it comes back. A couple of friends who, happened to them, and all of a sudden it comes back into focus, right? Because you need something outside of yourself to get through it.
So, Bill, you talked about the idea of like richness in a faith, and then you talk about those hardships.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that richness, like you talk about that richness, did that have an impact when you were dealing with those? I kind of even think about the idea of when you were 15, how would you have dealt with that kind of loss or that kind of change? And how, are those any of those things that kind of did linger, but like that as that faith grew more rich, do you see like specific ways in which it helped you through some of those hardships? I mean, does it feel like it was that became evident as you moved through it?
Well, I think, I mean, there was a foundation that helped to enter that. Like when I think about before I became a Christian and got involved in the youth group and after, there was like a shift to so much more joy, like in the late 90s versus the early 90s, I guess. Right.
This is when grunge died off, and then
Right.
we changed to pop music.
Right.
Yeah, boy bands.
It's funny how music echoes life. But like, I think that that grounding was really important. But the community, like that whole, admonition to don't give up meeting together, right? And then the idea like to let your conversation or your words be seasoned with salt and be like these are real things. Like I actually remember Paul, oh, I forget his last name. Oh, this guy was amazing. Paul was,
Yeah.
do you remember the D groups, the discipleship groups?
Yeah.
For a
Yeah.
brief period of time, at least they had these where you're supposed to meet with a discipler and they would help you memorize the scripture and go through and kind of mature a little bit in some core foundational things. And I don't know if you guys remember, I'm a really poor speller. I'm bad at memorizing things, really bad at remembering people's names. And this poor guy had, I think, me, Mike, and Jackie as like the core three people in a group. And I think, not to speak ill of any of the three of us, but I think for all three of us, memorization was not like a core skill. So the patience that this person showed, and we could not remember hardly anything. But the thing I remember is years later, these verses just come back and come back. And it's not like I went and re-memorized them very much. It's just like God just put those seeds in. Like, I've hidden my word in your heart so I might not sin against you, like that. I think that foundation from like 95, 96 time frame, just those years were really helpful. But the other thing is what I said about the beginning is community, right? Being able to actually be a part of a small group of people who care about what's going on with you and ask, right? Or see something is not right and care. That's a big deal. Like not going through it on your own. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Multiple suggestions in the Bible that doing this alone is not probably the best way to go.
Yeah, the whole hiding in the cave thing, waiting for ravens, it's not very common. It's pretty unusual.
I remember Paul too. He was super straight-laced, but had the driest sense of humor of any individual ever, and he was hilarious. So Paul, if you're listening, shout out to you.
We love you. Absolutely.
I went to visited his brother's church this last summer, or 2 summers ago, when we were searching for a new
that's
church
cool.
after our
Oh,
church
wow.
closed. Yep.
Well, and I'll
crazy.
say, I think all three of those people are pretty much still walking with the Lord. So that's amazing. Not to give him full credit. I think the Lord gets some credit, but I'm just saying.
Paul's
may have
listening there
seemed
right now,
like-
and he's like, "Yeah, they are." Mhm.
Awkward theology coming through.
I'm just saying.
It may have seemed like a waste of time investing in these kids that couldn't figure anything out, but we appreciate it.
So I'm curious, in terms of you, as we mentioned before, being 45, not 43.
Thanks.
My pleasure. What would your 18-year-old self say to your 45-year-old self, and then vice versa?
Well, I think the 18-year-old self would say to the 45-year-old self, get your butt on a missions trip so you actually don't grow cold. I think that's one thing that I haven't participated in.
Like a long-term thing?
Well, even a short-term thing. Since I left Five Oaks, I've stayed active in the youth group, and I've done like some of the youth, like local, winter weekend retreats or whatever. But I haven't done anything mission since we did, what was that? Light on a Hill? What's that mission's called? For Mexico?
Colina de Luz.
Helena de Luz, yeah. Right.
Jinx.
Since we did that, I haven't been able to, I haven't gone on a missions trip.
Yeah.
So I think that would be something that would be wondering why. Like, cause that was pretty impactful for me to have done that and then to have gone so long. My kids have gotten to go on missions trips, but I just haven't activated on that. So I think that's one thing is like, hey, that's important to do.
Are those missions trips your kids go on? Are they of the same nature? Like, because our mission trip was like go to the orphanage, serve the orphanage by doing a bunch of jobs around the orphanage. Then at nighttime, go into town, make sure you're dressed nicely, perform a church service at a church, right? And I mean, you almost look like a Mormon, frankly, because you had a tie on and everything, and then come back and kind of repeat.
I remember what I'm remembering about the Mexico is the service, yeah, like painting things, building things, whatever.
Yep.
And then we'd spend a ton of time with the kids, like playing
Oh,
soccer
right.
and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that stuff. I don't remember the performance, but I do remember like the dual nature, and then you get like maybe one day to relax or something. So my kids have got to go on 3 like local church missions. They're going around helping church plants that are part of like young churches to do different evangelistic things. They went and did a soccer camp in like inner city Chicago, in one of the most densest population areas in the US. And then it was a cross language soccer camp where they were helping facilitate, but the local church was running it. Our church is connected to something called Envision, which is like a local inner city church ministry, parachurch ministry. But they also got to go down to the DR because we have a sister church there that we've been connected to for years and participate in their ministry. So that was a lot of hard work. Like one of the things they did on this service project, when they were doing service things, is they went into a homeless shelter that a church was helping to run and support, and they cleaned it. And there was like poop in the soap dish and like all kinds of crazy stuff. And then they asked like, wow, how long has it been since you cleaned this? They're like, oh, we clean it like every day, every other day. But like, this was real work, right? They're not just like paddling paddle boats on the lake.
Right.
But yeah, I think that'd be one thing, is to actually get in the missions. But I think the other thing that I'd be asking myself is, who could you actually invest in as a young man, like the way that Tom or someone invested in me? Because I've been involved in these like youth group settings, but I haven't like picked somebody off to really follow up with, right? Because I don't know if you guys feel like this, but I feel like that was something that the leaders really made the most of in a lot of ways, is there was people that were actively involved in several of our lives. Yeah.
Spiritual.
Emotional
spiritual
mentors.
mention, we would call it discipleship in the church, maybe.
Sure.
I think that might be some, pointed questions that I would ask myself, which
That's
I've
great.
thought about.
That's great.
Life's different, man. Like we said in the intro, right? I distinctly remember just like coming out, going to college and being like, I got this, dude. And that's a great place. Like, it's a great mindset, I guess, to put put a kid into, going into the real world, but also like, you got to be ready for it to kind of blow your mind.
Well, and I mean, I was a new Christian. So like, I was like maybe a Christian for 2 years when I got out of high school, maybe. Like, that's generous, probably. And I was like, I'll do anything, God, you want me to do. I'll go like work with AIDS patients in Africa, like whatever you want. I just don't want to be some number at a big mindless corporation. So then like I got married, met my wife, and we needed health insurance. And I was like, okay. So I was like E0063174 at the big, 100,000 person corporation for like 9 years. And then
For the listeners, Bill is holding up a mug with his company's brand on it.
from the old
Former.
company, it happens to actually
company,
match
yes.
that employee number.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's like, God's like, hey, I love that heart. Can we work on some obedience and some like trust? And, what if I don't put you in the missions field? What if I want you to actually just mature and serve your family and like work? And it's like, oh, fine.
If I must.
Right.
That's cool. Is there anything that you look back on from that time in our youth group experience that you kind of struggle with or question, or, you maybe say, our motel, gunfights, notwithstanding, are there things where you're just like, that's not, I'm not going to say problematic, but just kind of, you've been like, we probably should do that different.
So there wasn't something that just jumped out at me off the bat. And maybe I've just got too much nostalgia, but I was thinking about this, but, the more I thought about it, one of the things is, in retrospect, like there's a number of people that I really cared about, or I suppose I do care about, I just don't interact with very much, who are leaders and whatnot, whose marriages have kind of fallen apart or have gone through divorce or whatever. And that's kind of heartbreaking. Like I know these people and I know that they love their families and like that's just hard. So that's also made me really think about like, our marriages, like they're so precious and they're so frail in some ways. And gosh, I just want to like shake each one of us and be like, serve your spouse, like, like dive in there because it's not guaranteed. Like these are people where both people love the Lord, and it just, so that's one thing that's tough for me, is to look at that and to say, and even leaders too. There's a number of leaders who I have like admired over the years that have fallen off the rails, and whether they're famous or local or whatever. And it's just like, oh, but for the grace of God, like we've got to be, again, community accountable. I don't know, but that's tough. Like there's not a safe path that you can know that you'll stay away from all these things. You've got to fight and repent all the time.
You got to be cognizant of like life throws stuff at you, you know. And I remember the feeling, particularly getting out of college and trying to start my own life, of being like, what I went, what I believed in high school and college, it kind of prepared me for this, but it really didn't. And you kind of got to figure it out and then fit it into, what you fit both around each other based on those experiences. But man, you're right. Like I remember in particular I won't name names, but it was probably like 10th grade ish, 11th grade. There was a leader, and I thought she was really cool, and she connected really well with a lot of the kids. And she was there for maybe
6 months,
right? But she was there all the time. Her husband, her worked in volunteered in the church, and just like out of nowhere, poof, they were gone. And it wasn't like, oh, they moved away or they decided not to go. It's like something happened. And I remember John, our youth pastor, vehemently trying to protect us from whatever it was, whether it was the information or the emotions about it or the experience. He's just like, don't worry about it.
We'll find someone else. They're going to be fine. But like something happened.
And I'm not saying like he should have sat down and explained it to us at that time, but that's the kind of stuff we were kind of on the other side of the wall from, and we didn't know what was going on. Is that those adults, John himself, everybody who was at that stage, they were dealing with their own stuff too. And so, they were trying to pour into us the best that they could.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too. I don't remember if you asked this and I didn't have an answer, or if it was just in your kind of thoughts ahead of time. But one of the questions, like what's changed and like what hasn't changed since then. One of the things I was thinking of is like this technology explosion is like it happened while we were going through it, but it's just totally different. Like I remember, Scott, it was a big deal that you had like unlimited America Online, like, right? Like you could dial on and chat as long as you want. And if I'm not I don't know if your family had 2 lines, so they could still get phone calls, because that used to be a problem, right? It's
eventually,
like, hey, get off the internet because someone might be calling. I'm not sure, but they might, right? But like, it's totally different what our kids are going through. And I just think about some of the foolish things that we did and said, even just teasing each other, whatever, right? Like if all that was captured and archived online, like that's tough. Right. And like this, like people maybe don't know what happened in the situation. That's probably not true anymore. Whatever situation happens, everybody knows. So there's like, that's tough. It's hard to live your life out loud in public, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every failure. Like we need grace so much more now, so go ahead.
No, you took the words out of my mouth. Like when it's public, it's easier to judge because you're just behind your screen watching it happen. And you're not involved with the person. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's going on the other 99.9% of their life. And it's like, well, that person effed up royally. Well, it's easy for me to judge. Haha, a bit of Schadenfreude there, right? But that's not a response. That's not a godly response, right? We should be responding with grace and patience and humility and care for that person.
Yeah, I think one negative is there's so much trolling that has happened, in public, on the internet and whatever. Some people started to kind of take that back into their actual interactions too. So that's tough. But again, this isn't brand new. Like we were encouraged at the time to show love and to act differently and like to have a different testimony. So we still have to do that.
Right.
Like, I actually one of the things I've taken that I write in my Bibles all the time. So I like have to replace them occasionally because there's too many highlights and, whatever, it's distracting. So I like look where things connect sometimes, but it's crazy to me how many things that Jesus said that seem totally revolutionary, like, love your neighbor as yourself. And as you go back and read through, you're like, oh, well, that was like in Deuteronomy or something. It's like he was revolutionary, but he was partly revolutionary by actually listening to what God has been saying all along that we just skim over and we just developed calluses because we don't want to listen to that. Like, it's just interesting how much is always been true. You know what I mean?
There's many through lines, and as much as things want to change, those ethics and truths remain the same. And I think it's really awesome that you just you've kept on, you've latched onto it, and you're just not letting go, right? And your family benefits, your kids benefit, your community benefits from that devotion. I think that's awesome.
Isn't that almost like a verse? Like I latch on to like him who's not letting go of me. I can't. There's a verse there I can't
We
quite
need to ask this
articulate.
Paul guy. Get him on the phone. Paul would know.
Yeah, Paul would know. Like I
Press on to grab hold of that which grabbed hold of me. There's something like that.
That sounds right.
That's pretty close.
Yeah. Well, our time's about up. You spent a lot of time with us today, and we really, really appreciate it because it's been great. But last question for you. Name one thing that was like the craziest youth group experience. We brought up a couple of things here, but like, falling in the pool. But can you remember anything that was just like outlandishly stupid? Besides, not burning the house, burning a barn down, potentially a house, that kind of thing. It was just like completely outrageous.
Let me turn that for a second, okay?
That's fine. Take your
There's
time.
one. No, I have you. There's another question you didn't ask me. Let me answer it. I think I'll get to something by the end of that.
Yep.
What does my 45-year-old self tell to my 18-year-old self?
Yep.
Right. I think one thing. Well, this is a ridiculous one. Is buy Bitcoin. No, seriously, it's not a fake. Okay. Other than that, though, while he like that verse, while he's working all things together for good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Right. There's that verse. While he's working all things together for good, to quote the Princess Bride, I don't think that means what you think that means. Right.
Mhm.
Because it's like a long, hard road to get to that good that he's planned, and not to take those discouragements as the idea that the light is dimming. Right. Because it is a long, hard, dark road sometimes. And I don't know if it was John, somebody used to say like, obedience is a long road in the same direction. I think it's a famous quote, but like, that's it. You just have to keep like pressing on with that faith. You'll find out that he is good. Right. Okay. So I got the story now.
Okay.
One crazy story. A child who shall be remain nameless on a youth trip. We were driving somewhere, in the series of vans, through the interstate system in gridlock Chicago traffic. I believe it was Chicago. And in this process, one of the vans had lost air conditioning. And,
Okay.
so to rectify the situation, the adult in charge of this particular van decided to drive with the door open down the freeway, the sliding door, right? So the sliding door was slid open while they're driving down the freeway to resolve the heat issue. So that is crazy enough, and there's all kinds of things going on there. But this gridlock traffic was really, really, really bad, and someone had decided to purchase and consume an entire carton of orange juice prior to this trip, which was recommended against, but they had nonetheless. And another thing that probably would not happen today is they really, 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 really had to go to the bathroom, and they didn't think that they'd quite be able to keep up with the van. So the van operators decided to rotate people through different seats and then have them go in the carton in the back to relieve the situation. I think that's pretty crazy when I think about it in retrospect.
They made a trucker bomb or whatever you call them in the back seat.
I've never heard that term before.
Whatever it's called.
All these names will be entirely unstated to protect the innocent, but I do remember such a crazy incident at some point happening.
Oh my gosh.
But so now that was
Was
when you
was
were
that a little bit later? I can't
yeah,
remember
because
exactly.
my sister, I was gone by that point,
I must have
and
been too. I don't
my
remember.
sister was on that trip, so I think you were helping out.
Okay,
I think that was as an
at
adult.
what point I became a semi-responsible adult is entirely unclear. So, it's all a blur.
How you said 12? Were you doing youth ministry
I was like
12
12
years? So you were like almost 30 when you were still at Five Oaks doing youth ministry?
I'm not good at math. That
seems. When did you guys come to Bethlehem?
Sounds right.
I don't know. I've got like 13, 9, and 9 years at church, roughly since 95. If that sounds about right.
Okay.
Those add up. 3 churches in that time period.
Sure.
Okay.
Pretty close.
Trying to think. Well, okay, so this isn't so wild then. If we
Well,
need to cut
it's
that
still
one
a
out, that's
wild
fine.
story.
Yeah.
Just because you were an adult during that story doesn't mean it
I
wasn't.
want to say I wasn't
totally out of hand.
responsible at that point, right?
Didn't you?
No, I don't think that. I think those are actually 2 different van incidents on the same trip.
So this isn't so wild, but it's actually memorable though, is on one of our camp getaways, I'm pretty sure this is when we were students, there were some students that were coming. We had, again, half the students coming didn't go to the church. So there's some students coming that were smoking. Like it would have been, I think, too young to smoke. You have to be 18 to smoke, right? Never really got good at that. But okay, so they're too young to smoke, but they had a smoking, habit or addiction or whatever you want. And this was like a big deal because they wanted to come on the retreat, but the church policy was he couldn't smoke. And I remember that John had worked out with them an agreement so that an adult could go supervise them and they could go off to have a few smoke breaks to attend the event, but in a controlled fashion. They could deal with their addiction. And like, I thought that was cool that he cared to actually not make that a blocker thing. But I remember it was a problem for somebody in the church. I don't know if they were an elder, remember what. They thought it was a big deal, but John really stuck to his guns. He's like, no, these are the kids that need to be here. These are the kids we want to include.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many people even knew that was going on, but to me, that was a big deal. The fact that he's like, this is the way, to use a modern term.
Wow. 2 stories I had no idea happened.
Sorry.
Fantastic. That's why we asked the question. So don't apologize. It was great. So, well, hey, again, we've taken a lot of time today. We really appreciate this conversation. It is very good to talk to you, and
It's good to see you too.
Yeah, we should hang out more.
Absolutely. By the way, Mike says, these guys should know where to find me. My cell phone number hasn't changed since I was like in middle school. So
He was the first one to have a cell phone. He was the first.
this is how, okay, technology changed. Technology changed so much. I know this because when I graduated from high school and went to college, I had a pager briefly because it was too expensive to get a cell phone.
Yep.
And there was like free payphones around campus that I could return the calls that I got paged when people got a hold of me.
Yep.
Like, that's how old we are. Yep.
For those younger listeners of ours, a pager was
Pager's a small rectangular device where a number would appear when someone called you for no other purpose than to call them back later.
it was a very good parental device.
So I have Mike's cell. I do have it. I just looked it up.
Yeah.
I do remember riding around in Mike's car in high school and him getting paged by his girlfriend at the time. And every page... every page that came from her was 911.
911. SOS.
And he just would ignore every last one. He was like, well, it's 911. I was like, oh, is this serious? Should we not go to White Castle? And should we call her back? No, everything's 911.
Right.
We gotta get chicken rings.
No, this was technically, I think we're out of high school just barely. But do you remember when the Star Wars movies started coming back out?
Oh yeah.
And we'd go to Woodbury 10 Theater. I think there's a theater right there, whatever it's called these days. I don't know. But we watched the first Star Wars movie, and we were so excited it came out that we had all gone to like Walmart and bought lightsabers.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to it. And after it, now we're a little bit older because I think we were like maybe 19 or something. Some of us.
We were 34.
We were. This
I was
a while
in college.
ago. Okay,
sure,
but
so you were too.
Yeah, so like 19.
Maybe, 1 to 3 years out of high school, whatever. And the police,
We went to the park after the movie and decided to have
a choreographed lightsaber fight, as, mature young Christian men would do, right? So we went over there and had a choreographed lightsaber fight for a while in like a church parking lot across from there. And police like pulled up. Somebody reported that there's, something happening at the church next door. So the police came in, like shine their spotlights on us. They're like, hey, you guys, get over here. How old are you? Is like 18, 18, 19, 20. They're like, okay, guys, we'll see you later.
There was enough shame for us to stop.
It was, yeah, that was classic, little things.
I wasn't ashamed. I'm sitting in a room full of comic book memorabilia. I have no shame at all about it.
For the record, how many times did you see that movie in the theater when that first one re-released?
9.
Yep.
9 times.
Yeah.
That one's still
there for many of them.
semi-watchable. Yeah, I mean, and I eventually I did go in once for free. AMC, if you can find me, you can try and take me to court. There was I remember we were going to go see it again, and there was people standing there, and nobody would take my money because there was like just workers at AMC Egan just chit-chatting. So finally, I just walked in because I got tired of waiting in line, and I just said, "Well, I've already given my money to this theater. I'll just go in and see this one for free."
After 10 times.
So I did see it one time for
Get
free.
one free. Yeah. Well, that movie could have made a little bit more money. Way to go.
Just missed out. Just missed out.
Yeah.
All right, guys. This has been really fun. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No doubt this youth group and you guys as friends shaped my life indelibly. So I appreciate that.
That's what we're here for.
It's been great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we do want to thank Bill for joining us. He was our first interview, and like we said in the intro, the audio was a little hit or miss. We were learning some things and just kind of had to figure some things out as we went. Hopefully it gets better from here. And we just want to thank Bill for bearing with us as we try to figure some stuff out. It was wonderful to chat with him and to hear about the impact that youth group had on him and then also his experience and his journey into adulthood over the last 25, 30 years. So thanks again, Bill. Glad you were with us. The music at the beginning and the end of the show is the instrumental version of Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Let us know what you thought about this show or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle SurvivedYG. That's at SurvivedYG. You can also email us at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show or want to drop us a line, let us know. We'd love to have you on the show. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating and review. If you enjoyed this show, you might also enjoy the other podcast I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's a chance to talk about some of the music I've documented and share from my calendar. Once again, it's called the Album Anniversary Podcast. Thanks again, and we hope to talk to you soon.